Hi, welcome to Rational Journey Through Revelation. This is going to be the first of our topical teaching series, and we're going to start out with Revelation 101. Who wrote it? When was it written? And who was it written to? So who wrote it? There are two main theories. The first theory is that John the Apostle wrote it. The second theory is that some figure known as John the Elder wrote it. The reason for it being John the Apostle is a number of things. Number one, in Revelation it uses terms that are unique to John. For example, it refers to logos. It uses a word for overcoming the world, like John would talk about. It uses the word alethenos for truth, which only John uses. Also, the fact that in Revelation the author introduces himself as just John. That would be weird if someone other than John the Apostle was introducing themselves on a first-name basis, because who else could be so well known except the 12 disciples of Jesus? The evidence for it being John the Presbyter was that one church historian, Eusebius, writing in the 4th century, said it was him, and he quoted Papias, who mentioned someone named John the Elder. The counter to this point is that the earliest church fathers definitely believed it was John. In fact, Irenaeus, who was the disciple of Polycarp, who was the disciple of John, Irenaeus definitely believed it was John the Apostle that wrote it. And the counter to the arguments for John the Presbyter would be John the Presbyter might have just been another name for John the Apostle. And another point that people who believe John the Presbyter wrote bring up is that Revelation uses very poor Greek grammar compared to the other Gospels. But a counterpoint to this could be that many of the Gospel writers would use sort of scribes to write down their words for them. John probably had this when he was writing the Gospels, but when he's on some penal colony in Patmos, he was unlikely to have that sort of scribe. And plus maybe it was happening very quickly, so he was overwhelmed and just trying to get it all down. So who was it written to? Well, this one is easy. We know it was written to 7 churches in the western part of Asia Minor. Now, scholars have brought up that there were many other churches in Asia Minor, but the Jews placed a significant importance in the number 7 as being complete. So Revelation could have just been written to those 7 churches, or the writer maybe chose those 7 churches just to symbolize the entire Church of Asia Minor, or the entirely early Christian community in general. Now we get to the most complicated part, and that is when it was written. So this one, there are 2 major views. The first is that it was written about the 60s. The other was that it was written about the 90s. So the mid-60s would be during Nero's reign. The mid-90s would be during the reign during Emperor Domitian. Both sides have their pros and cons. The earlier daters mention internal evidence, such as the temple still staying in Revelation, and James used a phrase such as a crown of glory in James 1:12. In addition, there's a list of scriptures called the Muratorian Fragment that some scholars believe dates from about the 100s, very early 100s, that mentions the Revelation was written during the reign of Nero. For the later date, people point to Irenaeus' work, who we mentioned earlier, which says the book was written in the 90s. However, the scholars have argued about how this point was kind of ambiguous. For example, Irenaeus said John was seen during the reign of Domitian. Well, was it him that was seen? Was it Revelation that was seen? We don't know. Another point that late daters bring up is that persecution under the reign of Emperor Domitian was much more widespread than it was during Nero's time. Nero mostly persecuted Christians in Rome, whereas Domitian, it was more all throughout the empire. We'll discuss this issue in much greater depth later. For now, we can say we know Revelation was written in about a 30-year span. It was either written in the 60s or the 90s. And this is a pretty reasonable time span. It's easy to go back and forth intellectually about this topic. You can gather together a group of 100 people and present them the same evidence. 50 people would believe it was written in the 60s, and 50 believe it would be written in the 90s. Also, scholars have tended to go back and forth on this throughout the ages. In the 1800s, the majority believed it was written in the 60s, and now most people believe it was written in the 90s. So it could switch. So the reason why the early date is important is because if you are a preterist and you believe Revelation predicts things that happen in 70 AD, well, you have to believe it was written in the 60s. So we want to be clear here that you need to separate your dating from your theology, because we need to consider the theology separately from the dates. You shouldn't change the dates to fit the theology. And we'll talk much more about preterism and the other views of Revelation in depth later. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a nice day.